So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and just here in the Rouge Valley in Pickering, Ontario, border between, I guess, kind of Pickering and Toronto, and thought to record a short Owada for the internet. So I thought that maybe could start with a little bit of meditation, so can lean forward a bit and arch the spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in and know when it's going out. If one breathes in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if one breathes in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And when watching the breath at the tip of the nose, can be helpful to change one's perception of the breath. Sometimes can imagine the breath almost as if it's in front and one is watching it. But instead can change perception so that it's almost like one was right in the center of the breath. Almost like one was standing under a waterfall. So on the in-breath, one can be totally immersed by the breath. On the out-breath, one can be totally immersed by the breath. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. and can open our eyes and do a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So, hello everybody, and hope you're having a nice day wherever it might be. And it's kind of a very nice day here today. This is the Rouge Valley, which is very beautiful, and found this kind of a new side trail that I've never been down before. And this kind of very nice spot with a built-in log. So decided to stop here for a bit. And so I got a question, sent a message to a fellow online who runs a website. It's called suttas.com, and he'd sent some videos. So anyways, was in contact with a fellow who runs a website called suttas.com on Facebook, and asked him if he or his community had any kind of questions that might like to see a video about, or he or she, not sure if it's a man or woman, and they said one of them was, as far as I remember, kind of is consciousness a stream? Is consciousness kind of like a stream of events? And basically, so the Buddha's teachings on consciousness is that consciousness, called like Vijnana Khandha, is one of the five khandhas, one of the things that people grab onto, latch onto, create a sense of self around, and then suffer, suffer because of that sense of self. And so this Vijnana Khandha is something that arises when you have kind of like an external object, then you've got the internal kind of consciousness faculty, and when both these things come together, it kind of creates consciousness, so you get consciousness at the eye, consciousness at the ear, consciousness at the nose, consciousness at the tongue, consciousness at the body, and mind consciousness as well, when you're conscious of various types of ideas. And so basically, various theories have arisen around consciousness over the centuries in Buddhism. But the main thing is that basically we generally don't experience things outside of what we call the five khandhas, or the six sense bases, unless somebody has a direct experience of nibbana, which happens to, I think, some people at stream entry at the various stages of the noble attainments. You hear some Krubajans talk about that. And so, other than that, everything that we experience is bound up with consciousness. Whatever we experience has this aspect of us being aware of it. And there's no getting away from that. So even some deep meditative states have this kind of aspect of consciousness to them. And this kind of consciousness always depends on an object. So as far as whether or not it's a stream, whether it lasts 1 or 2 seconds, I don't know. I've never read anything in the suttas about that. So the suttas are a kind of body of material. In later kind of commentarial Abhidhamma literature, they came up with this idea that there's all these mind moments called cetasikas, and reality is made up of them. And I think, as far as I understand, there's this belief that maybe in the gap or something like that, between mind moments, you've got this state called bhavanga or something like that. And I'm sure somebody will correct me if I've got this wrong. I may not have it 100% right. But in some meditation circles, this bhavanga gets equated with nibbana. So people will kind of, some people will go on kind of retreats, various things, and they'll have this experience where they have this kind of, dropping into a state of like consciouslessness. And one of the Kruba Ajahns, who I really respect, he calls this state in the canon as referred to very briefly, but in meditation circles in Thailand is called the sanyi. It's kind of the perceptionless kind of consciousness. And it's a mode of what we call wrong concentration. It's kind of this concentration that a person, if they achieve it, they kind of go into this blankness. It's kind of almost like nothing there. But and they come out and that's it. But it's not a kind of type of concentration that's generally recommended for the ending of defilement. So this is the kind of the Abhidhammic theory that I think, in my understanding, in some circles may have taken root. That kind of consciousness is like this stream of chop, 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 chop. And between the stream is what you have nibbana. Kind of underneath this kind of sensory consciousness, you have the real, consciousness. So as far as what the Buddha said about kind of consciousness, about the way that it goes, consciousness is always kind of present in all of our experiences. And so long as we're practicing, so long as we haven't had a taste of the deathless, kind of touch the deathless with the body, as they say in the canon, then we haven't experienced something outside of that, basically. All these various theories around it. As far as whether it's 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds, how much, how much my moments of cetasika is or anything like that, the Buddha doesn't say. And there's probably a good reason for it. The Buddha had this teaching about the kind of handful of leaves. In other words, there are certain things that are necessary to know, and certain things that aren't really so necessarily going to be so necessary to know. So whether or not kind of consciousness lasts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, my moments or kalapas or anything like that, whenever suffering arises, that's something that a person can know for themselves. And so this is where the Buddha has us focus our attention. As far as theories about gaps between consciousness, this isn't in the suttas. That's not something that comes from the Buddha's teachings. What the Buddha teaches about is developing dispassion for the 6 sense bases for the sake of cutting off attachment to them. So this is where we want to focus our attention as far as kind of consciousness goes. In the modern kind of day, a lot of the time, especially, consciousness gets kind of elevated. And so there's actually this sutta called the Brahmajala Sutta, where the Buddha talks about one particular type of wrong view, which is that, that which they call form, feeling, perception, mental formations, all these things are impermanent, but that which they call mano, mind, consciousness, vijnana, and I think there was another one. There was another kind of phrase, that, Pali word that gets used in the suttas referring to the kind of aware faculty. This is kind of something that's permanent. And this kind of idea has penetrated and been in a lot of different religions and actually snuck into Buddhism and through kind of various philosophizing that got done after the Buddha's death. So we ended up with a kind of school that said everything was consciousness, and basically I think in the end some schools equated consciousness with nibbana. And then this got kind of conflated. There were debates between Hindus and Buddhists about kind of consciousness being nibbana. Well, that's the same as the Brahman and all these various things. But what the Buddha says is that whatever type of consciousness there is, whether it's kind of near, far, exalted, subtle, basically whatever type of consciousness we can attain through meditation, that type of consciousness is all under the consciousness aggregate. In other words, whatever consciousness we experience is a part of what we cling to, a part of what makes suffering. So this is one of the kind of great dangers, I think, of, that my understanding is in kind of getting too theoretical about the nature of consciousness, because oftentimes, many times, this has led to people creating a sense of self-identity around consciousness in Buddhist meditation circles. So then you'll come up with various theories, various techniques, like we just need to watch, and this thing that watches, that's really us. So that right there is an attachment to a self. That's a self, kind of making consciousness into a self. The interesting thing is that a lot of the Thai Kruba Ajahns who'd say like attained arahantship, who'd finished their path, they made it clear that when a person achieves nibbana, they're not annihilated. So this is another kind of, not to make the discussion too kind of esoteric, I guess this is for people who have some interest in those kind of things, but interestingly enough, the Thai Krupa Ajahns, they did make it clear that Nibbana wasn't kind of like a total destruction of existence. The Buddha makes this clear as well. And so he says, that Nibbana is not annihilation. But what it is that's after Nibbana, he says, there's these different theories in Buddhist canon and kind of that the adherents of other sects had, like, the Tathagata, somebody who's enlightened, exists after death, they don't exist after death, they both exist and don't exist, they neither exist nor don't exist. And the Buddha called this a thicket of views, kind of wilderness of views. This person theorizes about these kind of things and kind of, okay, what is it? Is Bhavanga underneath you? Then they end up with a self-identity view. They end up with a self-identity view that kind of, that can fix onto consciousness, fix onto Vijnana Khanda, whether it's near, far, subtle, exalted, fixes onto this consciousness through this kind of theorizing. But the Krupa Ajahns, the people who attained arahantship, they also, as I was mentioning, made it clear that Nibbana is not annihilation. And so they would refer to another kind of type of consciousness outside of the five khandas. And in the canon, they also have this reference to a consciousness without feature. I think it's called Anidasana Vijnana. It's kind of where there's a monk who goes to search for where the kind of four elements cease without remainder, and goes all the way up to the highest heaven, but none of the gods know. So he comes back down to the Buddha, and the Buddha gives him this teaching about Anidasana Vijnana. It's kind of a consciousness without feature. It's kind of there's no, I think he says that earth, fire, wind, and water have no footing. That's the way he describes it. It's kind of there's no coming, I can't remember the exact thing, but basically it sounds like, the end of suffering. And there's kind of good reason to kind of equate this type of what you might call consciousness with Nibbana. So in other words, there is kind of, but that's all a person can really say about it. It's kind of what they say about what Venerable Sariputta in the suttas they say about the state of somebody after death is that basically as far as language can go, as far as concepts can go, as far as objectification can go, as far as the six sense bases, everything that one might know and see can go, that's basically as far as you can talk about. What's beyond that, what transcends space and time, change, all these various things, Nibbana, what lies beyond that is something that one can't talk about. So you can give different names. Okay, Nibbana is the harbor. Nibbana is, the island. You can call it Nibbana, which kind of relates to, I think, kind of the snuffing out of a flame. You can call it Anidasana Vijnana. I guess kind of this consciousness without feature. Kind of earth was a place where earth, water, air, and fire find no footing. It's kind of there's no footing there. But whatever it is, it's something that a person has to experience directly. It's kind of, there's no talking about it. As far as theorizing about consciousness goes, okay, is it, this many kalapas, is it a stream? Is it, how does it go? The Buddha doesn't say how many kalapas it is, but he does make clear whatever consciousness we experience, unless somebody's had their taste of the deathless, whatever we see, whatever we feel, whatever meditative attainment there may be, whether somebody drops into this bhavanga state or asanyi state, doesn't see or hear anything, whether they experience great bliss, until they have an experience where their defilements are permanently ended, until they have an experience where they touch the deathless with their body, then they haven't seen anything outside of the five khandas. So therefore, it's good to think about whatever consciousness the Buddha recommends, my understanding, to think about whatever consciousness there may be, whether it's near or far, whether it's in a meditative state or not, with dispassion. And he even recommends to think about the Dhamma with dispassion. And all of this is for the sake of going beyond the five khandas, developing dispassion for them. So this is where he has us focus our attention, as far as exactly the nature of consciousness, he just says it's dependently originated. As far as exactly the nature of Nibbana, he doesn't say. He says it's beyond reckoning. So what all the Buddha's teachings point back to is practice, to developing this attitude of dispassion, this consciousness of mind, wherever it is, however I experience it, whatever I experience through the six senses, through the five khandas, through meditation, all of this is not me. It's not myself. Learn to develop this kind of perception of it as being alien, as being a dart, as for the sake of developing dispassion, even for consciousness. So those are a few thoughts on consciousness. That basically, that the Buddha's teachings about it, wherever we experience it, it's dependently originated. Exactly, whether it's a stream or whatever it is, kind of, he doesn't say. The commentaries, the Abhidhamma, they have various theories about it, but the Buddha doesn't mention. And these theories, if we get into them too much, they can lead to self-identity views. They can lead to grasping on to meditative experiences as being nibbana when they're actually not. So all the time, the Buddha points us back to the path, points us back to looking for suffering, looking for its end. And the end of suffering, he points us to developing dispassion for the 5 khandhas, including all forms of consciousness, whether they're near or far, subtle or blatant, exalted or low, meditative or not. All forms of consciousness are suffering, all forms of vijnana. Then there's this anidasana vijnana, this, I guess, this kind of consciousness without feature, which doesn't seem to come under that, which seems to be an equation to nibbana. That's not suffering, but there's nothing one can say about it. It has to be experienced for oneself. So that's something that one can experience through practice. All right, so I think leave that for today, and hope that everybody has a great day. And glad that suttas.com had mentioned this question, kind of very interesting one, and nice to talk about. So wishing everybody all the best till next time.